Hello, creatives. I'm back again, and today I'm talking about the editorial assessment and beta readers. So, um, I hired two beta readers and technically hired two editorial assessment editors, but one of them didn't pan out, so I had to hire the second one. Um, so, in this experience has taught me that it's really, really confusing not knowing what type of deliverable you're going to receive. When I first hired the beta readers, they each gave me a letter and they had comments marked up in the document. Not very many comments. The comments were mostly like their reactions to things. One of them does have, like, in the beta readers that I went with, I was very selective. One of them is a bookstagrammer. She reads like over 100 books a year, and she gets paid, it appears she gets paid by bigger publishing houses to read new releases. And then the other beta reader is a literature professor. So she knows a lot about the prose and the narration and like all the techniques that go into writing. So their feedback was very valuable for different reasons. The bookstagrammer, who has read hundreds of books in the last few years, like since she started her bookstagram account thing, and no doubt countless books, even before she became a bookstagrammer, was able to talk specifically to genre conventions and my use of genre conventions and what I did well in terms of putting a new spin on what can very easily become a stale cookie cutter genre. Like I write young adult science fiction. My book is about mutants, and like most stories about mutants have to do with superheroes or like vigilantes or whatever. That's not my story. She was able to point that out and talk about how refreshing it was to see the kind of plot line that I was using within this genre. And then as to the literature professor, who was a beta reader, she was able to speak specifically to the areas within the book where the narration was well done and things of that nature. The first editor that I hired was very promising. I hired her through Reedsy, and this was not necessarily a fault of Reedsy, and tomorrow I'll go into a more in-depth review of like finding editors and beta readers on Reedsy versus finding editors and beta readers on Fiverr. I have a more in-depth review coming tomorrow, which you can watch right here if you want to skip to it. And it wasn't a very good experience. She seemed very promising. She was very excited to work with it. She said very good things about the sample that I sent in, because you have to pitch. You have to pitch to the Reedsy editor to work with them. And so I was very excited to work with her. Several weeks go by, and she was having technical difficulties. I don't know how true that is, but I never received it. She did give me a refund, so that was good. So then I had to quickly find someone else, because I have a timeline that I want to keep. I want this book to be published in September, which meant having an editorial assessment as like the final piece of the puzzle before I go into another round of revision and before I go into like copy editing and stuff. So I found an editor who handles editorial assessments on Fiverr, and I found that the deliverable wasn't much different than the deliverable from the beta readers. It was a letter and then comments within the document itself, and the comments were more her reacting to the story, whereas the letter was more her assessment of what I did wrong. Yeah. And the editorial assessment cost sometimes 4 times as much, depending on which beta reader you're basing it off of. The editorial assessment was about $850, and the beta readers were $150 and $200, in that range. And so the deliverables weren't that much different. They spoke about different things. There's some overlap with what they called out, and I will address that overlap. The editorial assessment had some very kind of out of left field of advice for the work, and one of the pieces of advice I'm going to completely disregard because I don't think the integrity of the story would be the same if I used that piece of advice. There's one piece of advice that I had considered, but I don't know if I am 100% sold on it. So I'm gonna implement all of the changes based on all 3 of their recommendations, and then from there make that final decision that the editor suggested that felt not like kind of out of left field, but I kind of had a sinking suspicion because at present the manuscript is quite long. It's 120,000 words, and her suggestion was basically to cut the back half, and that freaks me out because I have a very carefully laid out plan, and there's certain plot devices that I use within the arc of the story that I don't know how well they would carry over to a second book, like cutting it off in the middle of a certain plot device. I don't know how effective that would be. I don't know if that would I don't know how that would go over, in terms of the readership, and also in terms of like picking up the story from there. Like if I move the back half to be the first part of the second book, then there's other plot pieces. Like I know how this overarching story is supposed to end, and it moves. It's a lot to consider. So I'm trying to reframe it as do the rest of the recommendations between the beta readers and the editor, and then see what happens. If I am under 100,000 words, I think it can work as is. But if it's over 100,000 words, then I should probably consider, like if the word count stays around that 120K mark, I should probably consider splitting it up, which is scary to me. Because it would seriously mess things up in terms of the overarching plot of the story, of the grander story itself. Because this is not a one and done book. I don't even think this is a one and done series. Like there's a lot of stories that need to be told within the universe, within the world building that I have done. So I can very much see 15 to 20 books in this overarching world that I've built. Yeah. So anyways, that's what's happened. And that's kind of my experience with the editor and the beta readers. I don't see, like, there wasn't much difference between their deliverables. And if I had to do this over again, I think I would have just hired a third beta reader, taking care to see what exactly their credentials were. Like I said, one of them was a bookstagrammer, one of them was a literature professor. They both could speak to different things about the story that I wanted their perspective on. And I think I would have hired a third beta reader in place of hiring an editorial assessment editor, and then, gone to copywriting after that. I think I would have achieved a similar result. Yeah, because I think the biggest value add from the $850 assessment was her pointing out that I should probably consider cutting the book, which is something that I had a sinking suspicion that I need to do, but I'm not yet ready to accept that. Yeah. So that's that. I have a lot of work to do, so until next time, let me know if you have any questions or about the experience, if there's anything else I can answer or help walk you guys through, because if you are a writer and you're going through this process, ask me anything. I've gone through it already. If you are in that process, or if you have stories that you'd like to share in the comments below, please let me know. I would love to hear it. All right, gotta get to it. Until next time.